it's you again. Very well. I read like a snail, foreshadowing. So instead of doing a monthly wrap-up, I decided to do a belated bi-monthly one, so we actually have something to talk about. In October and November, I finished about 8 books, including the Diary of a Bookseller that I reviewed in the previous one. I predictably failed my autumn TBR plans, but not as terribly as I expected, and I doled out quite a few 4 and 5 stars, so either these were 2 very good reading months, or I just was in an exceedingly generous mood. Let's dive in and you'll decide for yourself. Alright, so in October, I read Vicious by V.E. Schwab and gave it 5 stars. I'm officially biased toward V.E. Schwab at this point because she has to go out of her way for me to not like what she's putting out. This was endlessly entertaining with some healthy dose of moral dilemmas and I loved every bit of it. I'm pretty sure everyone has read it by now, but if not, shortly, 2 college roommates develop a toxic friendship and superpowers. Everything can go wrong and everything does. I feel like V.E. Schwab's characters are her strongest suit because I'm emotionally attached to more or less everyone here. She was also clever to make her protagonists impossibly edgy and up their own rectums because this way Victor never has to stop and address the fact that all this mess happened because he couldn't hold back his ego for like 5 minutes. We don't need self-awareness, this is not that type of a story. If I were to point out any problems, I'd say it's almost comical how the opposite teams here are physically so close to each other and no one has any idea for a very long time until plot needs them to know. Like, okay Victoria, you want me to put my disbelief on a leash just for the sake of it. I can do that, no biggie. I'm really glad she has been continuing this story. She was even so kind as to give me almost a whole year to read the second book and process the potential emotional damage before the third one comes out. I'm kinda concerned that I won't be able to find the second and third parts in the same edition as this one. I bought it when I was in Chisinau and haven't seen it anywhere in Kyiv. This wouldn't be the first time I got installments of the same series in different formats though. I can put up with a messy looking bookshelf. That's kind of in my name. Next one, A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, or as I call it, A Good Girl's Guide to Social Justice by Holly Jackson. 3.75 stars. Again, brief summary, a high school overachiever isn't satisfied by just doing homework anymore and decides to make her school project into a full-blown murder investigation. Also, the wrongfully accused boy was Indian and his younger brother is now Pippa's sidekick, so we're getting a bit of a racial commentary. I have to give this book credit. At some point I was dead sure I knew where it was going and it was not going there. It still was somewhat predictable, I just predicted the other turn it could have taken. It's appropriately YA but still engaging and fun if you're into murder mysteries that are not too gory. Pippa and Ravi are very lovable, Pippa's family are a delight, so the story is pretty entertaining. At the beginning I felt like it was very on the nose with commenting on race, but Holly Jackson actually made sure to add some layers to it, showing that Pippa, as aware as she is of prejudice being a thing, still has some blind spots. That was realistic and appreciated. All that being said, I had some grievances with this book that really got under my skin. First of all, Pippa is a smart girl, but boy can she be dumb when the plot needs her to be. I kid you not, she willingly stays alone in a house with people she suspects to be violent criminals, not once but twice, and then, this is a mild spoiler so just click through this part of the video if you don't want to hear it, you can consult with the time codes. She does this thing that just drives me up the wall when a character knows someone might be capable of violence and says someone offers them something to drink and they take it and they drink it. Because you just think they've killed someone, it's no reason to distrust them, is it? Well, to be fair, at least Pippa isn't a law enforcement officer who definitely should know better, am I right, Detective Hillinghead? I'm still mad at you. Regardless, this girl has some army-level plot twist, which is understandable considering there's at least 2 more books in the series, but she acts like she either knows that or she has a death wish. She starts getting threats almost immediately and she does nothing about that. Doesn't go to police, doesn't tell anyone, nothing. It's not even that she doesn't have evidence for the point that she's trying to prove. The fact that she's getting threats itself could have been an indicator that this case isn't as clear as everybody thought, and she still doesn't do anything and keeps endangering herself, which would be fine. She's 17, that's not the wisest age even for a smart kid, but it's never addressed. Even after this pattern of behavior causes some permanent harm, even after the truth comes out, we never get a moment where her parents or her friends go, hey Pip, could you please stop trying to get yourself killed by going into dangerous situations alone with no backup? This feels like there was an important lesson that she never learned. At some point, Pippa literally goes, oh, this person lied to me about someone who was murdered. I should just go and stay alone with them and ask them why. No, that's not what you should do. My 2 major problems with this story also contain mild-ish spoilers. Again, consult the time codes. The elephant in the room, which I just don't have an explanation for, is the age gap. So Pippa is 17, maybe she's already turned 18 by the end of the book, I don't think it's specified. Ravi is 20, and by the end, the 2 are dating, which first of all came out of nowhere. They were just great buddies the entire book, but also, is there any reason why Ravi couldn't be at least 19? I don't believe you wake up a fully grown adult on your 18th birthday, but the difference between 20 and 17 feels just significant enough to be uncomfortable. I don't see why this was necessary. And another issue is, of course, the character of Andy Bell. I don't know how I feel about this archetype of a young teenage girl who proactively pursues an older man, basically seduces him while also being a menace to everyone in her life. The book is very clear that she was still a child and it was the adult man's responsibility to turn her down, but in the retellings of witnesses, she still feels so mature and full of agency, and I'm not sure how often teenage girls are actually that proactive and aware of what they're doing when they find themselves in a relationship with older men. I don't feel like it's a realistic dynamic. This can be chalked up by her being basically messed up in the head by her home life, and of course we meet her through retelling, so there's always some room for an unreliable narrator, but still it just didn't ring true to me. Might just be my perception. Also, this is more of a pet peeve, but there is a moment where Pippa tells Ravi how she's never missed school, like ever, except like maybe one time, and I feel like that's a bit overstating the point. So you're telling me you never got a flu or a cold or stomach bug, a family emergency, nothing like that? Either this girl's immune system needs to be studied or some other kids missed class because she never did. So to conclude, it's a good murder mystery, but it has its problems. I'll probably read the rest of the series, but I'm not expecting perfection from them. Next, Wormwood, Abbey by Christina Baehr, 4.5 stars. I've already read 4 books of this series because they are quite short, especially the first 2 ones, and super bingeable, and 3 of them I read during autumn. The first book introduces us to our protagonist Edith, who is the daughter of a modest clergyman. She lives with her family in an English town in the end of the 19th century. They all get along very well, and seemingly the most unusual thing about Edith is that she secretly writes detective novels. She's only keeping it secret because it's late Victorian era. She doesn't want to raise any eyebrows in her father's parish, but her father and stepmother know she does it and they are very supportive. If I got a grivnia for every female protagonist I read about this autumn who has loving parents, one of whom is their step-parent, I'd have 2 grivnias, which isn't a lot, but it's telling that I find it weird that it happened twice, isn't it? Anyway, Edith's dad gets a letter informing him that his brother and nephew very rudely perished and he is now an heir to Wormwood Abbey, located in an isolated place called Ormdale in Yorkshire. So the entire family goes to meet their landed gentry relatives and the dragons, because that's the main secret of Ormdale. There are dragons. They're like cute and small, but they are a thing. Now, what I'm gonna do is give like an overall review when I get to the 3rd one, because I genuinely think those 3 could have easily been one big book and the first part of a duology, with the remaining 2 books in the series being the second part. So let me get to the Castle of the Winds and I'll tell you my thoughts, because for the first 3 books my impression is pretty consistent. Moving on to November, The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. 5 stars, because I'm just generous like that. We have ourselves another murder mystery, but with a twist. It's very hard to describe without spoiling too much, but actually even the blurb gives you more information than the main character has for a long time, so I'll try to keep it vague and I'll warn you when there are spoilers. The protagonist wakes up, but he wasn't asleep. He just comes to his senses while standing in the woods. He hears someone screaming for help, hears a gunshot, and all he remembers is a woman's name. He stumbles out of the woods, finds a house, and it turns out he's a guest in the house and people there know him. So for a while it seems like he's just suffering from a memory loss, but no, because this guy isn't even our protagonist, he's just a host. The main guy, living temporarily in his head, has several such hosts with whom he's supposed to live through one day over and over to solve a cold case. You might be confused, but I promise it gets curiouser. The main attraction of this book for me is its setting. It's an old family mansion in the middle of nowhere. Of course, it's conveniently impossible to leave. The house itself is not so subtly fallen apart. It feels very inhospitable, very chill and moldy, and full of people who really don't like each other all that much, including the family. Some tragedy took place here years ago, and now the family is in decline, and most importantly, the daughter of the family is about to get killed. And our main character needs to solve the murder, not to prevent it, mind you. This book keeps an acrobatic balance between thriller and magic realism, while also toying with some interbellum aesthetic that makes you think maybe Downton Abbey, but everybody hates each other, and there's a murder, maybe more than one. And of course, there is a secret of what the main character is doing here, and this secret is actually the main one. I didn't see coming what it turned out to be in the end, and while I think it's a great concept, I had some issues with the moral conclusion of it all, because the core of the story has a lot to do with redemption and memory and what exactly makes someone deserving of forgiveness. Yeah, you know what? I want to talk about it freely, so welcome back to Spoilerland. Click through if you don't want to hear it. So at some point, the main character Aidan Bishop finds out that this mansion is a very twisted version of a prison, and his ally Anna, whom he tries to get out together with himself, is imprisoned for killing Aidan's sister. Anna was a leader of a terrorist organization, not very specified of what kind. Aidan's sister was a law enforcer tasked with catching her, and Anna kidnapped, tortured, and killed her. And Aiden entered his prison willingly like hundreds of those cycles ago so that he could torment Anna in return. But not only did he lose his memories about his own motivation after all the cycles he lived through, it's been so long she kind of doesn't remember who she was either. So even after he remembers it all, he still wants to get her out because something rehabilitative justice or whatever. And I don't know if I'm buying it on some ideological level, because maybe if Turton hadn't gone this far with how bad a person Anna had been, or if she could speak for herself on the matter, I'd believe it more. But he went with his truth, and I respect that, and I don't disagree with it enough for it to dampen my impression. I guess it boils down to how much, in your opinion, we consist of our memories and what really redeems a wrongdoing. Also, this book in another place did take one shortcut that I can't help but mention. We're still in the spoiler territory, mind you. So the main bad's motivation for initial crime that launched a chain of events was that they were just a psycho who didn't believe in giving a damn about other people. And it's a tad too convenient, don't you think? Oh, they were just a psychopath, void of compassion with few exceptions, but it felt earned by the time it was revealed, so I'll let it slide.
I'll allow it.
Okay, here we, I guess, end with the spoilers. To sum it up, it's a great murder mystery with a solid overarching moral discussion that I highly recommend if you like any or all the things that I've just mentioned. One thing, by the way, that I just remembered, like I said, the protagonist lives in the head of every host that he uses to live through the day and investigate the murder. And this book did something that the Midnight Library didn't do, and it really grated on me. Remember how in the Midnight Library, Nora woke up in her alternative version and it was like a blank slate. She didn't know anything about this alternative Nora. It felt like she had zero to none muscle memory, zero to none awareness of this alternative life that she'd been living. And every time Nora readjusts to her new life, we need to go through this second-hand embarrassment phase. Yeah, if you couldn't tell, I didn't finish the Midnight Library and I don't regret it. This book doesn't do that. Even when it's first host and the protagonist doesn't understand exactly what is going on, he already feels like this man whose head he occupies has his own traits and qualities and strong and weak suits. And our brain is also a part of our body, right? So he has some, not memories, but inclinations. He knows what this body can and cannot do, what this body likes doing. And as the story goes on, this feeling of the presence of the host intensifies. And some of those hosts are terrible people, and their bodies are bodies of terrible people who have terrible urges, and the main character has to wrestle with them. If there is such a thing as a realistic depiction of being in someone else's head, I think this was it. And it was just a cherry on top of great writing and a very well crafted mystery. It was another reason why I couldn't give this book any less than 5 stars, even though I had my notes. Moving on, coming back to the Secrets of Ormdale series, Drake Hole and Castle of the Winds by Christina Baehr, respectively 2nd and 3rd in the Secrets of Ormdale series, both 4.5 stars. Okay, it's gonna be hard to give plot summary for these two considering these are sequels, but the first one is very much setting things up, so I'll just keep it short. Edith comes with her family to Wormwood Abbey, discovers that dragons exist, and she actually likes being around them more than dealing with her father's parish members, so she's grown into her new role as a dragon keeper, and also with having a broody, dark-haired neighbor who is also her very distant cousin, is emphasized. For the first 2 books, there's no major confrontation to talk about, no big bad except the occasional hints that there might be someone behind the scenes scheming to get to the dragons. Instead, we follow Edith as she makes new friends, learns more about her new job, kind of realizes class inequality exists, and generally finds her footing. In the 3rd one, there is a conflict, finally, as she finds herself in Wales in an increasingly discomfortingly utopian community that she probably shouldn't trust. I must warn you, I've been loving these series, but that doesn't mean they're for everyone. The first 3 parts are pretty short, around 200 pages, and they are, one might say, pretty slow and uneventful regarding the main plot. At the same time, they're very endearing, very funny when they're trying to be, and I've heard them being called gentle fantasy, which sounds about right. I read these books in the Kobo app on my phone in a bombshell during night A raids, and they were incredibly soothing. It's a sort of fantasy where you kind of know that everybody will be okay, except maybe for the bad guys, but all the good ones are more or less safe, so you can just enjoy the ride. There are still stakes, but it's more about how bad will it get before it gets better. And the story is set in 1899, like I said, at the very end of the Victorian era, and there is no postmodern twist to it. The author, at least to my non-native understanding, keeps the style quite true to the period as far as novels about dragon keeping go. This reminds me of those buildings that were constructed in Kiev at the turn of the 20th century, imitating the styles of previous eras, like this neo-Gothic St. Nicholas Roman Catholic Church, for example. The author recreates the language and style of the era. There are also some themes that feel modern, but were also quite modern to the time, like prejudice, anti-Semitism, women's rights, colonialism, and so on. Those subjects can get pretty dark, but the story manages to treat them in a way that doesn't shy away from the darkness and doesn't get gratuitous at the same time. Edith isn't flawless. She has blind spots and she has to face them at some point. She makes decisions you don't agree with and then deals with consequences, so she feels like a fleshed out person, and I, for one, find her incredibly lovable. Swartz mentions that she's a clergyman's daughter, which is stated several times. She is very unironically a Christian, but the story doesn't get preachy. You believe that this is a real person who has a certain set of beliefs, not a figurine here to read a sermon to you. The world also feels real because even though the people of Ormdale are good and hardworking, they're still believably prejudiced, and the prejudice doesn't go away instantly because the plot says so. My favorite character gotta be Januszek, though. I would actually read an entire story just about now you're just spoiling me. It's a sweet, fun, entertaining read if you like historical fiction, and it's also quite informative if you read author's notes. There's a lot of research and lore going into these small books apparently. There's also a romantic subplot that again is true to the era, so it's very proper and adorable. It's not because it's true to the era, it just is adorable. It's not central to the story, even though it is very impactful and the love interest has a lot of weight. The romance plot must be one of my favorites this year. It's one of those cases when it actually makes sense why these characters would like each other. I also really like that he's the love interest. I don't think it's a spoiler. I like how he kind of subverts our expectations because you expect him to be this dark, gothic character, and first of all, Edith has no patience for that. She has absolutely zero interest in being roped into a toxic gothic relationship, and that's not who he is. He's more of a Mr. Darcy. He's just a misunderstood, reclusive introvert. I love it. This romance is very much a slow burn. It's very drawn out, and it's drawn out in a way that, again, makes sense. It's believable. Still infuriating though. I am very much rooting for this romantic subplot in a way that I rarely root for a romantic subplot ever. If it doesn't turn out to be the end game,
I shall be very put out.
I don't really have any notes except for maybe the main antagonist, whoever they might be, could have made an appearance once or twice. I'm reading the final book now and hoping to finally meet them. Next is the book that I DNF'd, which is The Book of Accidents by Chuck Wendig. So one of my book resolutions for 2025 was to DNF more books than usual, which I managed to do, but it wasn't too hard since I just had to DNF more than 0. This one I picked up from a book crossing shelf, which probably made things easier since I could and did just put it back. So Nathan comes back to his hometown together with his wife and son after his abusive father dies and leaves him the house. This town has some dark history. There was a serial killer in the area who got executed, or was he? There was some tragedy on the railroad, animals up being weird, but every house is a free house. So back to his trauma nest Nathan goes with his family, which includes an overly empathetic teenage son. What could possibly go wrong? I know you guys are having a housing crisis out there, but damn. I had to put it down because I admit I'm a bit of a chicken about horror stories, but I've already read Wendig's Blackbird. It was alright, so I thought if it's interesting enough, I can muster some courage. It was not interesting enough. The writing style felt clunky and a bit lazy, and I just felt like the characters didn't care about whatever spooky shit they've been experiencing, so why should I? Nathan's wife, Maddie, literally makes sculptures that apparently grow sentient. She's not sure. She blacks out in the process, which should be weird in and of itself. One of her sculptures attacks her, and she's like, whoa, crazy, huh? It goes about her day. Like, ma'am, is this a normal thing in your line of work? I also spotted this thing about Wendig. He did that with the protagonist of Blackbirds too, when he's trying to show that a female character is a badass and a strong woman. He makes her swear, and he makes the point that it's implied that it is not what is expected to her, but she's gonna swear because she's a strong woman. And I'm not wearing any pearls to clutch about strong language, but it's not a sign of a strong character in a woman any more than in a man. You just can't control your mouth when you get emotional. That's normal. Also, in his attempts to show that Maddie is her own person, he occasionally makes her a bit of an a-hole. She's showing very little sympathy for her husband, who's back in the house where he's been abused, and when she's asked by her family at some point, hey, where have you been? We kinda needed you here. She goes, I'm not just a mother and a wife. I have an identity outside of it, which of course you have, yeah, but you still willingly, I hope, took on those roles of a spouse and a parent. So how about some involvement with presumably your closest people? I don't think it's anti-feminist to expect you care about the family you chose to have, is it? Maybe it made sense for the character arc, but I never found out. I hit like 200 pages, checked myself on whether or not I wanted to follow these people for another 300 pages, and the answer was no. I did peep into the last page in case that it ends in a way that would make me go, wait, how did we get here? It didn't. So, that's a DNF. I'm still debating on whether or not to go through with the Miriam Black series though. Weirdly, Miriam is a woman written by a man in a way I like. Next one is a Ukrainian book, which is not translated, but I'm gonna tell you about it and the series that it belongs to because who's gonna stop me? It's The Song of Oakwoods by Pavlo Derevyanko, which is the third and final installment of the Grey Order Chronicles. 3.5 stars out of 5. The Grey Order Chronicles series is one of Ukrainian's works of fiction I wish were translated into English, but I have my reservations about this last part. The series overall tells a fantasy version of Ukrainian history that includes mythical characters called Hardcastle, which can be loosely translated as battle mages but with a twist. Basically, the author goes, what if in the 17th century Bogdan Khmelnytsky and his young Cossack hetmanate had had the support of some supernatural beings and thus the Ukrainian state had persevered? The author is the first to admit that the concept of a separate national state in Europe at this time is anachronistic by itself, but here people can turn into wolves, so I guess we'll let that be.
I'll allow it.
In Ukrainian folklore, Hardcastle are mainly Cossacks who were believed to have some supernatural abilities like shapeshifting or being bulletproof. Here, Hardcastle are a separate military force called the Grey Order, who basically don't answer to anyone but the hetman, the head of the state. The trilogy starts in the middle of the 19th century with a teenage boy, Severin Chornovovk meaning literally black wolf, who's just completed his training, going through a ritual, stabbing himself in the heart, entering the other world, and signing his name into a cursed scroll to gain the ability of turning into a wolf, being invulnerable to iron but not silver, and healing wounds with spells. So, off to a great start. Severin joins the Order and a group of young recruits, each of whom has a very distinct personality, and together they first go to Kiev to celebrate becoming full-blown Grey Order Knights. And during that stay, one of them goes missing. It turns out quite a few Hardcastle have gone missing in the previous months, and the first book focuses partially on what happens to them. Fast forward to the third book, where the characters have been through a lot, to put it mildly, and only now some of the questions of the first book get answered. I gotta say, it's bloody, people get hurt, animals get hurt, there's a very graphic scene of impalement, yeah, like canonically accurate one. It's pretty brutal, but that's to be expected. I enjoyed the story for the most part for what it is. The first two were both 4 stars. Pretty fun, the protagonists are flawed and layered, sometimes unlikable. They did feel a little bit Abercrombie coded, but there are still very palpable themes of patriotism, politics, corruption, moral sacrifice, duty, friendship. There are no perfect people here and no perfect solutions, and I'm very much here for it. But I do have a problem with the third book structurally. There are quite a lot of flashbacks. One is a villain's monologue, no less, and at some point you know where everything is going. And quite a lot of important stuff happens in the flashbacks, both in the second and the third parts, which left me feeling like this series should have had 5 parts and not 3, so that we could go through everything properly. I still ended up pretty much satisfied by the ending and by the questions this story asks, and I hope that Pavlo Derevyanko, who is also a serviceman, stays safe and writes more. Also, I got the edition of these books by the previous publisher. Unfortunately, the founder of that publishing house was charged with some alleged shady schemes with fundraising, so Derevyanko at some point broke off the contract, and for a while there was no information about new editions. The books were sold out, and I already had read the first and I couldn't find the sequel, so a family member found the remaining 2 parts secondhand in pristine condition and got them for me for my birthday. And just as I finally got to move on with the series, they were picked up by another publisher, the Old Line Publishing House, and the covers look so much better. These are the old ones, the ones that I have, and these are the new ones. Am I bitter? Of course not. And the last one, which I technically finished in early December, but guess what?
I'll allow it.
Endling by Reva, 4 stars. So, it's Ukraine, February 2022, and Reva is almost over her snail rescue mission and her side hustle as a wannabe mail order bride. She's over just about everything. Actually, most of her specimens are dead, and the only one left is incredibly hard to find a mate for, so apparently that's it for him too. Meanwhile, Reva's fellow wannabe mail order bride, Nastya, decides she needs to kidnap 100 bachelors who are in Ukraine on the romance tour to make the world know that this industry is in fact bad, and more importantly, make her mother finally show up and act like one. And then there's Pasha, who's ready to leave behind his comfortable life in Canada if any Ukrainian woman, preferably one called Ola, likes him the way he can't seem to like himself. And all those adorable characters don't notice February 24th lurking ever closer. This is a book about war, but mostly, I guess, about identity. The author, who was born in Ukraine and grew up in Canada, goes as far as pause her own book at some point to interrogate the concept of a Canadian Ukrainian writing about this war. She asks herself and us, is it okay that I'm the one talking about this? Am I the victim here because I'm Ukrainian and have family in Ukraine, namely her grandfather who lives in Kherson that was occupied and has been suffering from daily strikes? Or am I a witness? Do I have the right to cry here? She then goes farther and asks, what about people who live in Ukraine and witness the attacks but aren't directly affected? Are they both witnesses and victims? That's a very resonating train of thoughts, as I find myself often thinking, yeah, I'm spending the night in the parking lot and it sucks, but what about those in Kharkiv or Sumy, or those in the occupied territories, or the service people, or the ones who lost someone, and so on? Yes, drama is not a competition, but sometimes it's hard to remember. The war sort of interrupts the narrative, but not the theme, because Yeva, for example, is having an identity crisis of sorts. She's dedicated her entire life to saving snails, and to save a species, you kinda have to get two members of the species to provide offspring, for the lack of a better word. Ironically, Yeva has a negative level of interest toward romance in her own life, even though she takes part in romance stores solely for the money. And it's a very simple but very startling observation of how isolating it might be to not want something everyone is expected to want and either have or strive to have. There is a moment when it seems like Yeva finally found someone who is more than willing to accept her as she is, but that someone is an American who just had to open his big mouth and start preaching about how Ukrainians should try and understand Russians because no one really wants war. That made me want to scream, because I don't want a documentary in my fiction, Maria, thank you. I have complex feelings about how quaint and experimental this book is. It almost feels like it needs to constantly perform some literary backflips to keep us engaged, because otherwise Reva's Western English-speaking audience probably won't be interested in reading about the war in Ukraine. Is it still going on? Yeah, it is. This might be my projection, but it might not be. I first heard about it on one booktube channel, and I'd been properly traumatized by Sophie Lark and her very shallow usage of the marriage industry scene, so my first reaction was, how dare you? But here the quote-unquote brides and quote-unquote bachelors are portrayed as people as well as the participants of a dubious at best practice. The Commode organization is a very obvious homage to Femen. I actually went to read about the latter, and turns out the scene of the kidnapping in Belarus is very much pulled from reality. It's a pretty controversial movement, and even though the story doesn't focus on it, the theme of weaponizing a female body for protest is sort of offset by the brides here trying to turn tables and use male bodies for the statement. I guess my main problem with this book is that it is doing quite a lot of things and has to leave a lot to our interpretation, because there's no way it can finish it all. Another thing was that I found Pasha's character quite irritating, but I'm pretty sure that was the point. He's a serious person, but I'm not sure he's a very serious character. Do with that what you will. The Kherson bits, including a certain not shocking but interesting revelation about the grandfather, were all very moving and heartwarming. There is a lot of warmth in this book and a lot of love, but also a lot of irony and well-deserved bitterness. It was probably the most challenging read among these, mainly because I was listening to it in audio and it just wasn't going well. The narration is good, it's just a me problem, but also it's all pretty fresh, so I don't really enjoy repeating those history lessons that we all had to witness like just now, historically speaking. Nevertheless, it is very rewarding, informative, and I can highly recommend it. Fun fact, this book was actually longlisted for Booker, and considering what I've heard about the winner of last year's Booker, Orbital, I'm pretty sure if Maria Reva made a point about how Russians aren't responsible for anything they've done ever, she would have made it further. But yeah, those are my October and November reads, and I'm still pondering on whether or not to make a December wrap-up. Probably not. Also, I'm supposed to make a year wrap-up, aren't I? Oh god, that's a lot of talking. Okay, I'll go and drink something for now, and you enjoy your reading, and you'll hear me next time.